welcome again, colleagues here on this little video conference that we do on deadly market, the privatization in healthcare around Europe. Well done. Welcome to the topic, and I would introduce first of all Jan-Willem Goudrian. He's the Secretary General of EPSU, the European Public Service Union. And Jan-Willem, I would ask first from your side, looking from Brussels, where are we now on European level after more than 20 years of neoliberal policy and privatizations? Do you see a light at the end of the tunnel, or are we stuck in this tunnel? How to get out of there?
Thank you, Roland, and welcome also from my part to this gathering and this exchange of ideas and views on ongoing debates. Thank you for your question, Roland. I would say the feeling is mixed, Roland. If we are coming out of the tunnel of austerity, neoliberal liberalization policies and more. Just briefly on EPSU, for those colleagues who don't know EPSU here, EPSU is the European Federation of Public Service Unions, and we represent workers in a range of public services, and important here, especially in health and social care, both in the public, the private, but also the non-for-profit sector in all European Union countries and also in other European countries, including Ukraine, Russia, Turkey, for example. So I would say we have a good overview of the many issues which are on our table at the moment. As Roland was asking, we have seen for many years a policy of cuts in public spending, and that these cuts have led to cuts also in health and social care funding in many countries, and in the wake of that, a further increase in privatization. Roland started off by referring to the experience some of you have in your own municipality, as municipalities are saying, yeah, it's too expensive and we don't get the money to run our hospitals the way we think is needed. So we also hope the experience here and this exchange of experience might give us ideas, inspire us to fight those privatizations. We think from a European perspective that there is growing evidence that outsourcing, private provision of healthcare has significantly degraded EU member states and countries' capacity to deal effectively with also challenges like now the pandemic and the COVID-19 disease. So that is why we as EPSU, but also at global level, PSI, Public Service International, our global federation of trade unions, keep resisting privatization. This conference today, now our meeting, takes place on the eve of the Global Health Summit. Government leaders from the G20 countries, including the European Union, are meeting in Rome, online and physical, for this Global Health Summit. And together, the trade unions, EPSU and PSI, and civil society organizations also prepared an input in that debate. And we have been saying that what we have seen, that there has been a devastating impact of years of chronic underfunding of our health systems. And it means that what we expect of that Global Health Summit is that responding to pandemics should be anchored in building our health and our social care system capacity and strengthen the structures to deal with long-term resilience, if you want, of our health and our social care systems. And the failure to invest in health and social services risk squandering also the past gains in health, when we were fighting tuberculosis, in many countries, malaria, etc. And that will leave our health and social care systems less equipped to respond also to future pandemics. So the past has been not positive. Is there a bright future? As I said, I have mixed feelings. On the one hand, I think there's a bigger recognition of how austerity has been impacting on our public health and our public social care systems. But is it on the other hand, I fear that it is a temporary situation in which the corporations and the corporate political elites have seen that they need to use public money to keep the system going. Without public money, our economies would have collapsed. So they see public money is necessary to keep them going. But that is almost the same as in the financial crisis in 2008, 2009, where everybody was saying we need the state to help. And you remember the state bailed out the banks at that period. And the Economist, one of the, at that time, spokesperson for neoliberal economic policies, run actually a cover of one of its editions, arguing that we're all Keynesians now. We all believe in public spending and bolstering the role of the state, and we are going through a bit of the same at the moment. My fear is that after this period, the politicians who want to impose austerity policies on us are coming back. In Europe, we see that at the moment, for example, in Romania, where the Romanian government is already putting forward austerity proposals, actually cuts in public spending, is not paying out the negotiated bonus negotiated with the trade unions, the bonus for the health workers who have been in the forefront of the pandemic. So this means that we as trade unions will have to continue working to sensitize the public around what it means when there are impacts in public funding. But to do that, we also need to have the political activity, the work we do as unions in this forum, in other fora, to make the message heard that austerity, as the title of this seminar, is austerity and the market actually kills. It's not market mechanisms that deliver the level of public services which countries need, which are the elderly need, the patients need, and we know the decisions to ensure public spending or to prevent austerity are the outcome of political action at national, at European and at international level. So that's why I'm very happy, Roland and colleagues, that we are here together to discuss these issues with one another, and that tomorrow also the unions together with the civil society organizations are trying to influence also that global health summit which is taking place. So I'm very happy that you're here, and I want to make already a little plug at the end. We will ask you to come online with a picture of the action we have for the 23rd of June, which is one of the steps in our ongoing processes to advocate for our position and to continue the message that we say no to austerity. We want public investment. We want investment in our health and our social care systems. Thank you, Roland.
Thank you, Jan Wilhelm. That's a first impression from Brussels, and we will come back to you looking to the future. But first, let's look a little bit around Europe, or at least some of the countries that we have gathered here in the conference. And I would start with Mari Hupanen, which I hope I pronounced it more or less acceptably. She's a trade union research officer and a care expert with the Swedish union Kommunal. Mary, Sweden for us is the country of social welfare and of good public services. We adore Sweden for that, but how far did the neoliberal policy also affect your country and your healthcare?
I think it's weird that everyone has this picture of Sweden as a perfect social democratic paradise with with a huge public sector that functions perfectly, but that is sadly not the case anymore. Since the 90s, there has been very big privatization, market reforms, that a lot of deregulation that has affected Swedish social and healthcare negatively, sadly.
Can you explain a bit how that looks like in concrete, where these attacks happened and how far did they go?
It has happened during different political periods, during especially, of course, during different kind of periods when the right-wing politicians have ruled the country. Firstly, in the beginning of the 90s, because of the financial crisis, that was the first wave of the privatization. Then the second wave of the privatization was in around 2006, 2007, when there was a lot of these voucher type reforms were launched, where for example you get like the customer choice reforms, where the elderly or the patients can choose their care provider and they can get their voucher, and the financing will follow the consumer, which we don't like that kind of rhetorics, but and it's been driven by both ideology and as well as trying to do cutbacks. It's like it's both. In some municipalities, it has been more of a political choice that they want to privatize. For example, the Stockholm region is extremely right-wing region, where it has been an ideological choice to privatize, whereas in some of like the poorer regions or the poorer municipalities, it has been a strategy to cut back on the expenses to get the cheapest provider of care. And then there's something that's no other country in the world has experienced, or they have experienced, experimented with it, but they haven't continued with it. That Sweden has also privatized the schools. That we have this freedom of choice reform also in the education sector, which sounds like a, and that's why I think it's funny that people think that Sweden is this paradise, when I think it's extremely neoliberal.
I understand you're not Swedish citizens, but Swedish customers now in the meantime. But did you have some like successful resistance also? Did you have some battles that you won? Some examples you can give how you managed to do that?
Yes, Kommunal has in the 90s, in the beginning of 2000, Kommunal wasn't always negative towards this. We thought that this would provide also a choice to our members, for example, the practical nurses, to choose an employer, and that would result in higher wages or better conditions, better working environment. That hasn't been the case. So Kommunal's resistance to these kind of market reforms have grown, because now we know that it doesn't benefit the members of Kommunal. There has also been left-wing resistance, but sadly, originally in the 90s, for example, the Swedish Social Democrats were for these kind of reforms, but I think has been a resistance. There hasn't been huge like national waves of privatization during the left wing or left centrist rule of Sweden, but there hasn't been a reform to go back to the way it was either. It's hard. Even the bigger the market shares the care companies get, it's harder and harder to go back. But during 2016, 2017, there was a national project to take back the healthcare and social care sector. And there was a project to look on how this could be done. Sadly, because of the right-wing lobbying, sadly, because of the right-wing majority in the Swedish parliament, it didn't succeed. So but I think it's growing again. It's especially when it comes to school, especially when it comes to maybe social care, elderly care. I think there's a growing knowledge of this that people, but I really hope that this would become like a big election question that people would get to choose, because there's, I think it's like 80% of Swedes that are against this for-profit. So there's quite a gap between like the public opinion and the political reality, sadly. And that is very, very, very depressing, I think.
Listening to you, it sounds a little bit like a lesson learned would be resist privatization as soon as possible, as early as possible, as long as you can. Or how would you summarize your lesson learned from the changes and the development that Kommunal made?
Yes, that would be the case. I try not to think about it, because it's also a very destructive thought that once you've crossed some line or a market share that you can't go back. We're a democracy. There has to be a possibility to go back and take back control, the democratic control of the public. But yes, I would agree that it's something that should be stopped in the beginning. And if I don't think there's any union or any country that still 2021 would argue that, for example, privatization will lead to higher wages for the care workers. I don't think anyone thinks like that anymore. Now it's even from the right wing, the argumentation is more like the company's right to exist. Like these kind of quality arguments, this kind of, there has to be a lot of different kind of care providers, that kind of argumentation, not even the care industry continues with that kind of arguments. It's much more of the company's right to exist, like, which is, yeah, that's very, very sad, very depressing. But I hope the Swedish example will, Sweden can be like a warning example. So that could result in something good. But I hope that we can fix the Swedish example here, like politically, that there will be a chance to go back.
All right, thank you, Mary, and we'll come back afterwards to you. Thanks for your first input. I'd like to move on a bit to Sean Stockham, the Vice President of the Public Service Union Unison in the UK. Sean, after Maggie Thatcher, Tony Blair, and all the alike, what's left of the public sector in the UK, and where are you heading to? I hear that still the health system in the UK has a very high standing in the population. How do you see the things?
I think the UK is a little bit different because we're four devolved nations, so and we've all got our own different way of doing things, and especially with social care, and my own country, Wales, the architect of the NHS, and Iron Bevan, was born 15 miles up the road from where I live, so it's dear to our hearts. There is the privatization, the health service, a lot of it is privatization through the back door. and we're fighting it every step of the way, and it is dear to people's hearts. We have a number of problems in common, the 4 nations, and for that reason, the solutions that Unison suggest are ones that we think would work across the entirety of the UK. Meaningful social care reform has been promised by the UK government for at least the 4 years, but even in the last opening of Parliament speech, it wasn't even mentioned. And I have to say, as a frontline carer who's worked all through COVID, I'm sick to death of being told that I'm low skilled. That really, it hurts. It hurts because I'm doing a job a lot of people won't do, and a job a lot of people can't do. It isn't for everyone. I accept that. The government has just set out plans, but the social care is totally missing from their plans, the UK government. In the devolved nations, Scotland's got the Farley report, Wales has got is talking of a health and social care bill, which will join everything up and make things a lot different. But we can't let it go on any longer, because we're going to fail, and we're going to fail the most vulnerable in our society. That's how I feel about it anyway.
You mentioned privatization through the back door. Can you explain what you mean by that?
Well, it was in the news the other day that a number of GP surgeries have been bought by an American company. So it doesn't take much imagination to think, well, they're only going to come into it because they're going to make money out of it. The British government have sold contracts to different American companies and European companies to provide different services that were more than capable of being provided within the NHS. And it's all done. It's not done up front. It's not done out in the open where there can be a discussion. It's all done and dusted, and then everybody suddenly finds out about it.
I was reading that Boris Johnson, when he was in hospital, he had 2 nurses taking care about him. I read now one of them quit her job on the protest for the British policy. Is there a lot of what we call flexit, so like the people leaving the healthcare because of the poor situation, because of understaffing and bad salaries, or?
Well, definitely, and in social care itself, where I support adults with learning disabilities, and I also work with a reablement and rehab unit, and we're over 100,000 people in my sector short of staff, and we can't recruit. We're, as I say, we're not valued. They came out and clapped for us, but as I have always said, very nice, thank you very much. It's nice to know you think I'm worth standing on the doorstep and clapping for, but put some more money in my pay packet so I've got a decent standard of life. I'm 66 years of age and I can't afford to retire. But I'm not alone in that, and that's not unusual. And I think it's all going more the way that they don't want us to retire. Our retirement pension is a pittance. I've worked all my life and paid into everything, and that's the same with the nurses. The nurses, all they're asking for is £2,000 a year pay rise, the 2K. That's Unison's ask, and they just don't. Oh, it's okay. You saved our lives, right? Going back to work. We don't want to hear about you anymore. You've outlived your usefulness to us. But then there'll be something else will come along, another pandemic or something horrendous, and we will be there at the forefront because we're in the job because we care.
I think that's what the same thing we see here in Switzerland is, like politicians are spreading warm words and applauding from the balcony, and as soon as it comes to some real benefits, some increase in salary or more staffing or whatever, They don't want to hear about it. They vote against it. So
no, and it's we've got poverty pay, and the other thing that I as a vice president of Unison actually I fronted a government petition to highlight that issue about paying us not a living wage, because they took that on and it isn't a living, but the real living wage, which is a lot more. Well, I say a lot more, it's a lot more to me. To a billionaire, it's not a second's money. But it's, I don't know, it just frustrates me, and that we're not valued. And we then, if we have that pay rise, our money then goes into our local community. 90% of what we earn stays local. So we're putting it back into the economy. We're not putting it into an offshore account so that we don't pay taxes and we don't pay national insurance. I say I'm not afforded that luxury. I want to pay my way. I've always paid my way. But I think the likes of all these multimillionaires or billionaires even who know how to avoid tax, they really annoy me, because if they paid their fair share, we'd all be in a better place.
I think we all share your feelings about that. Yeah, when looking the companies making millions and not paying a penny.
Yeah.
Let's ask Des Longley. He's the Secretary of Unite in Edinburgh and the not-for-profit sector there. He's in the Scottish Trade Union Congress and since many years one of the activists. Scotland is still part of the UK. Is it the same picture, or is there any, at least better future for Scotland than we just heard about the UK?
Yeah, I mean, Scotland had its own parliament in 1999, and since then, the Scottish Parliament has been dominated by social democracy. Some people would say it's leftist social democracy. First it was Labour, but now it's the SNP. But if you look at everyone who's a member of the Scottish Parliament, I think it's about, except for 30 Tories, the other 90 are Social Democrats. So we've been dominated by social democracy. We haven't never been dominated by the Tories. That hasn't stopped, though, the implementation of neoliberal policies and privatization. That's been continuous, I think, up until 2019. Year 2000, for example, I think 80% of social care people were employed in local authorities. But the Scottish government put pressure on local authorities to reduce that. And so by the time we got to 2019, 80% of social care workers in Scotland are employed by the private sector. So there's a very systematic privatization of the of social care. And the way it happened was that social care was going to grow, but the local authorities were stopped from bidding to provide the growth to meet demand in social care. The Scottish government made sure that the only way local authorities could get the demand met was by commissioning the private sector to do it. And since 2000, the private sector have always stepped in to provide the service. They've built care homes, they've raised money, and they've just done it to make money. And the unions have been campaigning against this for a long time, and we've always said that it was a disaster in the making. But in 2019, I think it all came to a head when everyone agreed that the involvement of the private sector had been an absolute disaster. All the evidence had been assembled and looked at, and the Scottish government had set up something called the Fair Work Convention in Scotland with the unions, and they looked at social care, and they said that it's been literally a disaster. It's produced a system which doesn't provide quality social care. Quality is reducing. It can't retain staff. It isn't fit for purpose. And so this Fair Work Convention recommended to the Scottish government that more money be invested in social care, unions be encouraged, be collective bargaining for all social care workers. And this report had a big impact, I think, on the Scottish public, and it was the first big real turning of the tide. In fact, the unions had persuaded the Scottish Government to set up a Fair Work Convention. It had looked at social care. It had started to change public opinion. And one of the things that came out of that report was that the Scottish Government set up a new minimum wage for social care workers, which is higher than the national minimum wage, which is laid down by the UK government. So at the moment, I think the national minimum wage for all workers is, I think, £8.91, but the minimum wage for social care workers in Scotland is £9.50. That may not seem much of a difference, but it was something that was achieved in the last 2-3 years by the trade unions. And there's 200,000 people employed in social care in Scotland, and so the unions were able to get a wage increase which applied to a lot of workers. And the Scottish Government has been persuaded to keep increasing the Scottish living wage every year. So I think that's the first major victory. Another victory that happened was that the Scottish Government was forced to set up this Feely committee because of the disaster of COVID, and so many people died in private sector care homes. Because private sector care homes are not seen as being fit for purpose. They failed in inspections. They weren't constructed to deal with an epidemic. And the found to be really wanting. The disaster we had talked about became public. And that shifted public opinion. It made the Scottish Government ask this Feely committee to make recommendations about the future of care in Scotland. And their report was published in January this year. And that meant they're recommending a Scottish social care service, a national social care services. And because it was published in January, that meant it became part of the general election debates leading up to our general election on the 6th of May. And New Parliament's majority of the MSPs are now committed to setting up a national care service and, I think, to implementing collective bargaining. This is a big, major change, I think, victory for trade unions. And there's an opportunity in the next year to actually change things around. And the Scottish Government have now said, they've just been set up, they've said that they're going to introduce legislation in the next year to set up a Scottish public social care organisation. So the unions will have got the opportunity to lobby in the next year on how this is all set up, on how collective bargaining is set up to cover not just local authority workers, social care workers, but the 200,000 people employed in social care all over the country. That's an opportunity next year. Against that, we're going to fight the lobbying of the private sector, who see social care as just a sort of way of milking the public purse. They see it as a money-making exercise, and they've totally failed to show any interest really in providing quality of care. And that's been exposed by the pandemic. So the unions have a big opportunity in the next year or so to create a new public sector social care organisation, but they're also going to have a big fight to beat off the private sector lobby, who are as determined as ever to dominate social care. And they're up to blackmailing the Scottish Government. They say, you need us now, which is true, because they provide vast majority of social care. And if you want us to cooperate in providing a service right now, you'll do as we ask you to do. And the Scottish Government has the power to nationalise social care homes. It's got the legal power, but they're very afraid to use it because it means that they have to purchase all the private sector social care homes in Scotland, and that would cost a lot of money. According to some calculations, some people have said it wouldn't cost that amount of money because the money could simply be borrowed. But I mean, there's a lot of debate about that. So I think I feel that in Scotland, the fight back has started the last 2-3 years. We've moved on, and there's an opportunity, a chance that we can defeat the private sector. And not only be good for trade unionists, and not only be good for us organising social care, but it would mean that there's a chance to have proper quality social care services, which doesn't exist at the present time. So I think that's my message, I think winning back public sector control of social care is possible, but it's got to take a fight, and we've got to be well organised to do it.
But I understand the political, I mean, you had a votation recently, as you mentioned, so basically changing the political setting allows you to move forward. So maybe you will move out of the UK, you will move back into the European Union, and we will all together move to Scotland once you have this great system up then. Okay, thanks, Des, for this encouraging input. We are sure to continue this debate, and we are with you and hope for the best there. Let's move a little bit then south to Germany. Dietmar Erdmeier joined us. He's in the national leadership of Verdi, die Vereinigte Dienstleistungsgewerkschaft. He's responsible, among other things, for the European health policy. He's also the vice president to EPSU and the Commission for Health and Care. Dietmar, how does it look in Germany after all the Merkelism? Where are we in Germany now?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation, Roland. I heard a short presentation in German. I hope it's okay for all affiliates. Ich möchte kurz was dazu sagen, wie die Erfahrung in Deutschland mit der Privatisierung ist. Also ich unterscheide da nochmal zwischen Pflege, also Altenpflege, Long-Term Care und Krankenhäuser. Wir haben eine gute Berichterstattung in Deutschland, was die Entwicklung in der Altenpflege anbelangt, also sowohl bei den Beschäftigten als auch bei den Pflegebedürftigen. Und wir haben auch eine gute Berichterstattung der Bundesregierung zu den Einrichtungen. Wir haben insgesamt also im ambulanten Pflegebereich in Deutschland 14.688 Pflegedienste. Davon sind 9.770 in privater Trägerschaft. 4.720 sind in frei gemeinnütziger Trägerschaft, das heißt also von den Kirchen und den Wohlfahrtsverbänden getragen. Und wir haben lediglich 167 Pflegedienste von den 14.688 in kommunaler Trägerschaft. Also es ist verschwindend gering, was wir im ambulanten Bereich an kommunaler Trägerschaft noch haben in Deutschland. Im Pflegeheimbereich haben wir ähnliche Zahlen der Heime zu den Pflegediensten. Wir haben 15.300 stationäre Pflegeeinrichtungen. Davon sind 6.570 in privater Hand. Das ist eine Zunahme innerhalb von 2 Jahren um 6,5%. Also es ist eine deutliche Ausweitung der privaten Trägern. Und wir haben 8.115 frei gemeinnützige, also wieder auch Kirchen- und Wohlfahrtsverbände. Da haben wir auch eine Zunahme von 6,3%. Und wir haben lediglich 584 kommunale Einrichtungen von den 15.380. Und die gehen sogar noch zurück. Das ist fast 1% weniger innerhalb von 2 Jahren. Also wir sehen ganz deutlich, dass die kommunalen sich zurückziehen aus der Versorgungslandschaft und vor allen Dingen die privaten Träger dort reingehen. Im Krankenhausbereich haben wir eine ähnliche Entwicklung schon seit Anfang der 90er Jahre. Seit 1991, da hatten wir noch ungefähr 1.150 staatliche Krankenhäuser. Heute haben wir im Jahr 2017 ungefähr noch 600, also ist halbiert, 50%. Wir hatten 1991 circa 950 frei gemeinnützige Krankenhäuser. Die sind auch zurückgegangen auf circa 700, also auch ein Rückgang. Und wir haben eine Steigerung der privaten Krankenhäuser von 350 circa im Jahr 1991 auf jetzt etwas über 700. Also Rückgang der kommunalen, leichter Rückgang der frei gemeinnützigen und ein steiler Anstieg der privaten Krankenhäuser in Deutschland. Jetzt habe ich, das hätte ich euch gerne gezeigt, ich habe hier einen Auszug aus einer Pressemitteilung aus dem Jahr 2019, also genau 2 Jahre zurück, 15. Mai. Da hat der Chef von Helios-Kliniken. Helios-Kliniken gehört zu Fresenius, Krankenhausanbieter. Ich glaube 111 Krankenhäuser in Deutschland. Hat gesagt, sie haben ein Problem, dass nach ihrer Einschätzung die Zielrendite im Jahr 2019 von 15% nicht zu erreichen ist. Aber auch mit einer Marge von 10 bis 12% kann man gut auskommen. Und jetzt kommt's. Und dann hat er noch gesagt, und dann äußerte er sich darin zudem die Erwartung, dass Patientinnen in Zukunft bereit sein sollten, größere Distanzen zurückzulegen. Und umgekehrt liege es an der öffentlichen Hand, also an den Steuerzahlern, an der öffentlichen Hand, den Klinikbetreibern die Infrastruktur dafür zu schaffen. Also es ist im Grunde Wahnsinn, wie stark auch die Erwartungen sind. Also sie zahlen keine Unternehmenssteuern in Deutschland, haben aber eine deutliche Erwartung an die Rendite. Rendite bedeutet ja, das Geld wird rausgezogen aus dem System. Ne? Also wir erwarten ja auch mit Steuergeldern und natürlich Geldern aus der sozialen Versicherung, dass das Geld zumindest im System bleibt und reinvestiert wird in gute Strukturen und nicht rausgezogen wird. Das ist meiner Meinung nach auch ein sehr großes Problem, dass weltweit Aktionäre bedient werden mit Geldern, die eigentlich für eine gute Versorgung zur Verfügung gestellt werden müssen. Dann jetzt gerade im Mitte April gab es wieder eine Information, zwischendurch natürlich auch, aber ich habe nochmal geguckt, was ist aktuell von Helios gesagt worden. Das ist überschrieben Rendite statt Ärzte. Und jetzt steht hier, Helios, Deutschlands größter Krankenhauskonzern, hat auch 2020 große Gewinne gemacht. Also im Pandemiejahr große Gewinne gemacht. Trotzdem will der Konzern sparen, indem er an den ärztlichen Stellen kürzt. Die Aktionäre erwarten dafür eine Dividendenerhöhung. Also weiterhin auch dort am Personal sparen, damit Dividenden und die Erwartung der Aktionäre erfüllt werden. Was sind eigentlich die Auswirkungen aus unserer Erfahrung der Privatisierung? Tarifflucht, Ausgründungen in Tochterunternehmen, Trennung von Immobilien und Betrieb. Also das haben wir ganz häufig, dass das getrennt wird und dann wieder angemietet wird. Dann sehen wir, dass wir eine Einschränkung des Leistungsspektrums auf profitable Leistungen haben, also dass fokussiert wird, wo lässt sich Geld mit verdienen, wo sind unrentable Bereiche im Haus, die ausgegliedert werden können. Dann haben wir auch üble Sachen gehört. Jan Wilhelm kennt das alles. Wir hatten beispielsweise einen Pflegeheimkonzern in Hamburg, Pflege und Wohnen heißt der. Der ist privatisiert worden im Jahr 2009, glaube ich. Und dann hat sich der neue Investor dazu verpflichtet, den 10 Jahre zu halten. Das hat er auch gemacht. Genau nach 10 Jahren hat er ihn verkauft. Also er hat ihn erst 10 Jahre behalten und dann mit Gewinnmaximierung verkauft. Und das Perverse daran ist, dass einige Einrichtungen in Hamburg, direkt im Stadtgebiet in Hamburg liegen und da andere Teilbereiche auf den Grundstücken sind. So, jetzt haben sie versucht, auch die Grundstücke nochmal zu filetieren. Also haben im Grunde gesagt, da haben wir jetzt die Pflegeimmobilie und das andere verkaufen wir nochmal extra an Wohnungsbaugesellschaften oder wie auch immer, weil natürlich Bauland auch sehr wertvoll ist. Dann Auswirkungen auf Beschäftigte habe ich eben gesagt, Tarifflucht aus dem TVÖD. Wir haben einen Tarifvertrag des öffentlichen Dienstes im staatlichen Bereich, die Spaltung der Belegschaft, Union Busting. Wir sind viel unterwegs, auch mit unseren Kolleginnen und Kollegen international. Solidarität, Jakob und Jan Wilhelm und andere Kollegen kennen das natürlich. Weniger Personal, weniger Fachkräfte, schlechte Arbeitsbedingungen, weniger Arbeits- und Gesundheitsschutz ist ablesbar. Kein Bekenntnis zur Sozialpartnerschaft, insbesondere im Altenpflegebereich. Wir haben es da ganz schwer, Arbeitgeber zu finden, mit denen wir da Tarifverträge machen können. Und auch kein Bekenntnis dahingehend, bundeseinheitliche Tarifverträge auf den Weg zu bringen. Das heißt also, wir sagen, wir brauchen bessere Rahmenbedingungen für Flächentarifverträge. Wir brauchen bessere gesetzliche Rahmenbedingungen, also Personalvorgaben, die am Bedarf orientiert sein müssen, der Pflegebedürftigen und der zu versorgenden Patienten. Und wir brauchen mehr Kontrollen beim Arbeits- und Gesundheitsschutz. Also die Gesetze, die da sind, müssen kontrolliert und auch sanktioniert werden, wenn sie nicht eingehalten werden. Und dann, glaube ich, haben wir alle zusammen auch noch eine große Aufgabe, mehr zu werden. Ne? Also wir müssen stärker werden als Gewerkschaften, damit wir unsere Interessen auch gegenüber Arbeitgeber und Politik durchsetzen können. Abschließend möchte ich noch sagen, und das haben wir aber vorhin auch schon von Marie gehört und auch von anderen, ich glaube, der gesellschaftliche Druck lässt sich organisieren. Also ich habe jetzt noch mal so ein bisschen recherchiert, wie ist denn eigentlich die Haltung zu Privatisierung? Also in Deutschland lehnt man die Autobahnprivatisierung ab. Man sagt, die Bahnprivatisierung war ein Fehler. In Berlin kommt es zu einer Rekommunalisierung des Stromnetzes. Ne? Wir sehen, dass es immer wieder auch Umfragen belegen, dass Deutsche mehr Staat wollen anstatt weniger Staat. Ich glaube, die gesellschaftliche Stimmung ist da. Wir müssen es nur anders abholen noch. Ne? Also wir müssen, glaube ich, das, was Jan Willem eingangs auch sagte, müssen wir für uns nutzbar machen und für unsere Forderungen. Vielen Dank.
Danke, Dima. Das tönt so ein bisschen nach dem altbekannten Motto, Gewinne privat, Verluste dem Staat, was da geschehen ist in diesen letzten Jahren. Deutschland ist bei uns in der Schweiz immer so ein bisschen, man nennt das der Vorreiter, ist seit 10 Jahren unserer Politik voraus und wir sagen dann immer, alle Fehler, die ihr macht, die wiederholen wir 10 Jahre später, aber dann doppelt so schlimm. Also hoffe ich mal, wir lernen vielleicht ein bisschen etwas und es geht da doch dann vorwärts. Zu deinem letzten Statement nur noch, morgen ist ja auch Strike for Future, also bei uns in der Schweiz mindestens sind die Gewerkschaften sehr aktiv mit beteiligt, auch mit der Umweltbewegung zusammen am Strike for Future sich zu organisieren für eine bessere Zukunft, eben auch für soziale, öffentliche Dienstleistungen. And I'd switch to English back again and move down south further to the last but not least participant in our round now, Yolanda Gil Alonso. Hola, buenas tardes. She is the International and Youth Secretariat working for the FCC COO in Spain. Yolanda, can you tell us something about the situation in Spain and your ongoing struggle? You just had elections also. How far does this influence the policy on health and care in Spain?
Thank you, Roland. Yeah, well, first of all, I would like to thank to Roland and Jan for inviting me to this conference. It's a pleasure to stay here. I would like to tell you what happened in Madrid a few years ago and what we expect from the years ahead regarding privatization in the health system. So in Spain, since the 1990s, almost all governments have allowed and promoted privatization of the management of the public system under the justification of reducing public spending and efficiency in the provision of services. Obviously, this justification is an attempt to hide a neoliberal ideal with the sole purpose of breaking up public services and obviously the welfare state. In Spain, we have several forms of privatization. I'm going to tell you 3 of them, which are the most important ones. One of them would be the public-private partnership, in which the government gives the concession for the construction of hospitals to private companies with the condition that they then manage the hospital for a certain number of years, around 20 or 30 years. And then this hospital will provide public services to the citizens, and the regional government will pay an amount to these companies per citizen, regardless of whether the resident needs care or not. Another form is the concession, which consists of the government paying to private companies for some services that the public sector is not providing at that moment. For example, dialysis. In this case, they pay per patient and per session. And then there is the privatization model known as the private financing initiative, in which hospitals are built by one or more private companies, and this takeover of the management of the services consider non-health. So all the services that you can imagine there is in a hospital, except doctors, nurses, and healthcare assistants. So in Spain, these type of models, because we have all of them, have been accentuated since 2009 all over Spain, but especially in Madrid. In addition to this privatization, there has also been a reduction in the number of beds in public hospitals, with entire wards closed due to clear underfunding. All this management has led to the fact that during the COVID crisis, the region, the different regions and provinces with the most cuts have been the worst affected, even to the point of collapse, as you all could see in Madrid. There has been a lack of health professionals, a lack of PPE, a lack of hospital equipment, a lack of beds, which has meant that the temporary hospitals have had to be opened in exhibition centers with obviously insufficient equipment and insufficient staff. I suppose you are wondering, why is this more accentuated in Madrid than in the rest of the regions? This is because the regional governments are, in Spain, the regional governments are in charge of the organization, financing and management of the healthcare. And the different right-wing governments that have passed through Madrid have turned into a laboratory for experimenting with different models of privatization of public healthcare, with constant threats of privatization and decapitalization of the public healthcare system. In Madrid in 2003, with the entry of the right-wing party called in Spanish Partido Popular, a political framework was built with the objective of privatizing all health services. And obviously this was accompanied by a strong campaign in which they claimed that the private is better than the public because it gives you the option and the opportunity to choose, the right to choose where and who you want to treat you. Is this government of the right wing, when in 2007 began to build 12 hospitals in Madrid. Since their construction, there has been a process of gradual sale to multinationals and private capital funds. So these public hospitals, then they were under the multinationals and private capital funds after years, obviously. Although the companies that received the concessions were basically construction companies, they have been sold to other entities too, not only construction companies. These hospitals, these 12 hospitals that I'm talking about, they had very few beds. The management was really a disaster because they had to transfer staff from the public hospitals to these new hospitals to be able to carry out the duties, which meant obviously an overall reduction in the workforce of the public health system. And then from that moment, we had very historic demonstrations in Madrid, which, to be honest, I believe the government did not expect, because until then, there had been no clear opposition on the part of health professionals to the policies of decapitalization and privatization. But in this case, from 2007, the measures were going to directly affect the professionals because they wanted to cut the workforce by laying off between 7,000 and 8,000 workers. They wanted to cut salaries and they wanted to increase working hours. These demonstrations came to be known as a white tide. I don't know if the translation is correct. In Spanish is Marea Blanca. And this is because of the large number of health professionals who turned out in their white coats into these demonstrations. From my union, there were several demands that we think played a key role in delaying the privatization process until January 2014, when the Court of Justice of Madrid ratified the suspension of the privatization of health in the Community of Madrid. So it was something that we are very proud of it. However, unfortunately, the privatization of external services of some hospitals, like call centers, cleaning services, laundry, was unfortunately carried out anyway. During the last 10 years, the aggressions and premeditated attacks on public health have been answered with strength and forcefulness, and rejected in a united way by the people of Madrid. I think that the constant demonstration, mobilizations, but also the complaints and the legal actions undertaken, especially by the unions, have made the most aggressive mercantilist proposals of the right-wing governments fail. As you all probably saw in news, the health system of the Community of Madrid is deeply debilitated. And this has been clearly shown during the COVID-19 outbreak. The physical and emotional overload of the professionals teams, the reduction of the workforce are a clear example of this deterioration that can only be contained with an enormous commitment and professionalism of the workers of the health system. In these last 10 years, more than 4,500 jobs have been lost, and we have a very high temporary employment rate, is more than 33%. This COVID-19 crisis drags our public health system, and the unfair weakness that from Comisiones Obreras has been denouncing are manifested in a brutal way, and obviously we think it's due to an irresponsible management of a right-wing government led by the just re-elected 15 days ago Díaz Ayuso, which is obviously from the same party of the previous privatizations process that we took place before. But we cannot say that the right wing is the only party who is allowing this privatization. Today, we have come across the news that the president of the Spanish government, Pedro Sánchez, who is supposedly on the left wing, has announced yesterday a public-private partnership as a way of developing health and biotechnology in our country from European recovery funds. So instead of investing in public health and developing a real public biomedical research network, they are doing this type of things. So the white tide, these demonstrations years ago, managed to stop one of the most aggressive privatization processes in Spain. But as you can see, we cannot lower our word because the privatization process will continue. And therefore, I think from the unions, we must make every effort to stop this. Thank you.
Thank you, Yolanda, for your information about Spain. And let me just look into the round now. We have with Jan Schriever, somebody from the Netherlands. We did not hear anything from the Netherlands yet. You want to say some few words how things look there? Is there all the same like in other countries we heard, or you have some specificities?
Well, of course, it is the same problems in the Netherlands as well. We have for a long time a neoliberal government, and what they did, we had a national health system, and they say if private health insurance is put in, it will be cheaper. So that happened. Everybody has to have a private insurance now, and people have to pay an own risk of €385. So before they can go to the hospital, they have the first 385 euro is their own risk, so they have to pay themselves. And that means that poor people will avoid healthcare. And in the long term, the healthcare is more expensive because it takes too long, and if they had good care for them, it would be good. These private insurance companies spend every year about €1 billion on advertising to attract people to come to them. And that's money which should spend on healthcare. Well, the European semester said that the Netherlands spent too much on healthcare. That's about 8 years ago. And the neoliberals started with a big austerity. And they said, well, all elderly care, etc., we are not provided from the government, but that is locally done. So every little community has to look after his old people and spend our money on it. But at the same time, the government said there should be a reduction on the money of 3 billion. So they had to do it cheaper. There were all kinds of healthcare cowboys in home care. So everybody who could start a firm, a cleaning company, said, oh, we can do some home care for people. And those people who do the work got a reduction on their wages. So they were very low paid, and during this pandemic, we have seen that these are essential workers who should be paid more. They sacked about 70,000 people at that time, which are never coming back, and so there is a lot of pressure on it. The other thing on the healthcare insurance companies to hospitals and doctors, they say you have to fill in all kinds of rules. We have these rules, but we want you to check everything and write down that you checked it. So if they divide medicines, they have to do that with two persons to not make a mistake. And when they supply it, they have to do it also with 2 nurses. And that takes a lot of work. For an intensivist on intensive care, it means that there are 30,000 protocols, and the insurance company insist that you write off all these things that you have done it, otherwise they won't pay for the thing that you have done. The insurance companies also make agreements with hospitals about how much care they will provide. And my own hospital had for 3 years ago done more than was negotiated with the insurance companies. That meant that we had about €5 million to get from these insurance companies. But they say, no, we agreed a lower amount of things. So for the hospitals, it was very difficult to get a little bit of this money back. And at the moment, we are busy at the university hospitals with our collective agreement, and there is absolutely no money to have a pay rise. And that makes it difficult. In July, we start with the general hospitals, also for the collective agreement, and we're sharpening our knives because we know that there will be a big battle to get some money. About the bonuses, it was also awful. They gave only a few people in the hospitals bonuses first time. The next time they gave, the first time was €1,000, and that was mostly for the people who were directly working with COVID patients. And this year they got only €250, but for all the people. And the government doesn't want to have a structural pay rise, which we demand as unions, because we say you should have a structural pay rise that every time goes on, instead of a bonus, because bonus we don't have so much on. In Belgium they did that very well. They said we don't want bonuses, give us a structural pay rise, and they have done it very well, I must say. But the Prime Minister said we can't have a pay rise for these hospital workers, but because otherwise the taxes should be risen, and everybody has to pay then more for it. If you ask the people, I think they would like to pay a little bit more. But on the other hand, the Netherlands is also front runner on avoiding taxes. It's a tax haven, and it is terrible. And if everybody should pay the taxes, it should be important. And another thing is, of course, you can see on my picture the non-profit on pandemic thing. We are trying to raise signatures there for that, to get the European Commission so far that the TRIPS waiver, so that the pharmaceutical companies don't have this monopoly on the medicines. Okay, that's
it was just a
bit.
Thank you, Jan. There was just a vote today afternoon. You maybe already saw it. It was with a very slight majority of 10 votes. The European Parliament voted to lift the COVID medicaments patents to, so a slight majority, a little victory for the moment. We'll see how it goes further. But obviously, it's all about money. That's what I hear all the time. It's money makes the world go round. It's like we are customers. Those who can afford to be good customers are welcome in all the health and care system. Those who can't afford it shall take what is left for them, and maybe the state shall then pay for it. And I always like say, when we have these kind of debates here, you know, hospitals should make profits. They should be like businesses. And I always wonder, like the police or the fire brigades, nobody would ever ask them to make profits. They have to function. They have to provide a service. But with hospitals nowadays, it seems to be mainstream that they should make profits. We heard from our German colleague, 10%, 12%, 15%. Part of it then goes abroad. We have in Switzerland also companies that provide profits then to South African companies. So we see the same picture about all around. Looking to participants, I think we covered all the countries present. If not, please intervene. I know that in Portugal, Jan, you may say more about that. They have some day of action today. That's why our Portuguese colleague is not with us at the moment. Jan Willem, I would hand it over to you after all what we heard now around Europe. What do you make out of that now for a European policy, trade union politics against privatization?
Thank you, Roland, and thanks, colleagues, for the contributions. And I think the message is very clear, which comes out of the different contributions in terms of how wrong political choices lead to wrong political choices to go for private provision of health and care lead to problems for workers, but not just for workers, also for our communities and for the people we try to take care of in our hospitals, in our elderly homes, and so more. So I think your picture gave quite a uniform message, and I think you also notice it doesn't matter in which country you are. The exact way in which it's constructed might be different, but because of our national systems, but the pressures are very very similar. For us, that must mean, as European trade unions, and I also know our colleagues from PSI have connected here, so also at global level, that we have to continue to make to provide the evidence which comes from your experience at national level, from your workplaces, to keep on pushing that evidence also at the European and at the global level, like tomorrow with this global health summit I mentioned in the beginning. I think some of your presentations also showed the window of opportunity there is, the increased realization that this private model doesn't work. Like you said, Roland, you wouldn't ask the firefighters to make a profit or the police to make a profit. Although I mean, there are also outsourcing in the firefight, in the fire services, in the police, and certain functions are put out for tender. So in the end, some of them want to privatize everything and reduce the state to nothing, and that, of course, we cannot allow, and we have to work with many others in society to prevent that. At European level, we have a strong message. Also, the ETUC, the European Trade Union Conference, brought that to the Porto Summit last week. Making clear that we don't want a return to these austerity policies, and that is also, I think, the message we want to bring out on the 23rd of June. The 23rd of June, which is Global Public Service Day, set up by the United Nations some years ago to celebrate the work of public service workers, to celebrate the work of our members, the work our members do for the community, and we will use that as a day of action to underline the work our members do, that without the work of our members, our societies, our economies would have collapsed during this pandemic. Our members were in the forefront, not just in health and social services, but across a broad range of public services. But we also use it as a day of action against the commercialization of our services, the commercialization of public services, against privatization, as well as a day of action for higher wages, for more staff, and also for quality health and care, and in general public services. So that, I think, is the challenge before us, Roland and colleagues, to work together, to be united in this fight, and also to work cross-border. As the presentation showed, it sometimes looks like we have our own little battles when a hospital in Zurich or a hospital in Stockholm or an elderly home and clinics in Hamburg are privatized, for example. But it is all part of the same fight for a better world we are fighting.
Mari, you wanted to add something?
Yes, I just wanted to reflect on one thing that I failed to raise when it was my turn to present Swedish example. I think that this kind of this battle against the privatization and is something that's ongoing there, even though there's like been this depressing trend towards more privatization. These are very much like battles that happen on the municipal level, in the cities, in the regional, when there's a hospital privatization. So there's an ongoing battle, even though that we have failed to go back in the way that we still have these freedom of choice models on the national level, but there are very much like union success stories on the local level, and that's something that I think I sounded a bit too negative in my part, because I think the union activism is an amazing power to make a change in the local level as well. And Union Kommunal is very big, like every 20th Swede is a member in our union. So I think we have like actual power, even though we still haven't succeeded to go back in, like when it comes to the freedom of choice laws at the national level. So I just want to end on a positive note.
Thank you for doing that.
Sorry. As well, in the UK, we do have some private hospitals, and they're making millions off the NHS because we're being starved of cash, and then they're being paid to do the work that we would be able to do a lot cheaper if we were given the cash in the first place. And we've also, a lot of our care is private sector, as you've been told, and some operators, not all, but there are some rogue operators. They've got offshore companies registered. They don't care about their staff. The staff are on 0 hours contracts, and the staff are not trained properly. In Wales, I know we are registered now. We have to register under social care, and we have to set a certain standard. We have to do certain qualifications and things like that. And that's why Unison are calling for a national care service, because we think that's the best way forward to get us as recognised as the professionals that we are.
Thank you. We are running out of time, but there is still Yolanda with the input, and I would, as last, hand the word over to David Boyce from PSI, who has joined us also. Yolanda, please, the microphone is yours.
Yeah, just very quick. I wanted to answer our colleague from Unite. In Spain, I was telling him through the chat, but I think it's better if I explain it here. It's quick. So in Spain, in the private residential homes, it was a really disaster. We had around 30,000 of deaths because of the COVID contagious infection. Before the COVID crisis, the unions were trying to negotiate a collective agreement, a state collective agreement in this sector. But they didn't want to pay raise. So we told them at that point that if they don't increase the salaries, the people will go to the public system, because the workload is less in the public system. The salaries are better in the public system. So we told them that they really needed to sign that collective agreement. They didn't want, so the negotiations were broken. And we did demonstrations at that point. And obviously, with the pandemic, it is demonstrated that the problem in the residential homes are quite high, and all of them are private, because in the public ones, the problem was as well, like in all the Europe, because they didn't have PPEs at that point. But obviously, in the private ones, the problem was bigger than in the public. So it was a disaster.
All right, thank you. Then last but not least, David Boyce from the PSI. May I hand the microphone over to you?
Thank you, Roland. And thanks for inviting me to this really excellent meeting. Again, these virtual meetings are tough, and at the end of the day, it's tough. But let me just say that the link I put in there shows some of the fundamental contradictions that we see when dealing with global capital. I'm talking about a multinational aged care nursing home company that is part owned by public sector workers' pension funds. Now, Roland, you know a little bit of this because the Swiss pension funds are pretty strong. Sean and others in the UK, you know this. The Dutch, you know this. You have strong pension funds. You know that your pension funds sometimes do things that you're not necessarily agreeing with, because your pension funds are maximizing your returns. And so what we're seeing is there's a private nursing home company that is maximizing profits by reducing the amount of staff, reducing the wages they pay, and reducing the amount of care they provide to the paying patients who under COVID were dying in droves. But the profits is what really counts. And so here we are as workers with our pension funds dying. Also, the workers in these nursing homes are dying, and we're confronted with the contradictions that we have in this day of globalized capital with financialized everything and privatization. We also have, and again, our comrades from the UK, you know what Bupa is, right? Sean, nod a few. Yeah, I see Sean nodding. Bupa is another private nursing home care provider. In Australia, it was shown to have horrible labor relations and patient care. And then on top of that, they dodge their taxes. This is a very hot political combination that we are able to use to force our politicians, our legislators, our executive, the media, to look into it and make change. And that is the stories that I bring to you, is when we have the right research, when we understand what's behind the money and the policies, when we bring it to the media, we can make some changes. Thanks very much, Roland, and Jan Willem for EPSU and all our comrades.
Thank you, David. Jan Willem, anything to add for you from your side at the moment?
No, not really. I think I've said what I had to say. I can only thank the speakers, Mari, Sean, Des, Jan, Dietmar, yourself, of course, and Yolanda, with the example for Spain, for their contributions and for taking the time to exchange with each other on what is going on and what we experience at the workplace and what our members are experiencing at the workplace when we talk about bringing in the profit motive in care, in health and in care, and why that is so important for us to work together to try to oppose and block this. Yeah, I can only wish everybody success with their many fights they have, and for us to work together and bring about a real strong trade union voice.
Thank you, Jan Willem. And I'd also like to say thanks to all the participants, being panelists or just following our discussion. I would especially also say thank you to EPSU, to Jan Willem and to Monica for the organizational matters, to the interpreters, Martina Wallace and Paul Donal, for doing the translation so that we could have our debate in the two languages, German and English. I'm sure it was not the last session we had. I'm sure it was not the last time we talked about these issues, these matters. The struggle will continue, and I'm glad, and I wish you best luck to all of you. Thanks again for joining us. Thanks for being here. We will, as I said, do a documentation of the whole conference, the video, as well as documents that the panelists will provide. I will send you all a mail once the things are ready for it, and I look forward to any next debate. For the moment, thanks from my side. Thanks to EPSU and all of you. Wish you a nice evening and good luck, and keep on.